Hello once again to the Father's Will broadcast. Thank you so much for joining in, whatever time you're joining in. Thank you so much for lending some of your time to listen to this video. Today, what we're going to talk about is something that's very important and very crucial concerning this mark of the beast. And we're talking today about the point of not being able to buy or sell unless we have this so-called mark of the beast. Now, on the surface, a lot of people believe that this whole thing about buying and selling has to do with a microchip, okay? And that without that microchip, you will not be able to buy groceries, you will not be able to do banking, you will not be able to get approved for a loan, etc., etc. But I suggest to you that this whole thing about buying and selling involves something a lot more darker than what many believe. First of all, let's attack the issue about not being able to buy or sell unless you have this mark, okay? What exactly does that mean? Okay, so people will say, well, I don't want to take the chip when it's offered because once I take the chip, I lose all control of my faculties, and now the government or whatever municipality has control over me. And I'd rather go without instead of giving in and taking this chip to just get a simple amount of groceries. I'd rather go without or rather starve to death. Might I suggest to you that that is not the correct attitude as far as looking at this topic. Why? Because it says in Revelation 13, he causes great and small, rich and poor, free and slave to take this mark on their right hand or on their forehead. In other words, it says it causes all, great and small, rich and poor. That just means that anyone can get it. It doesn't mean that if I choose not to take this chip that I've neglected to take the mark. No, even if you don't take the chip, I want you to hear me closely. Even if you don't take this chip, you have the ability or the potential of taking this mark. Anyone has the potential of falling into this snare because that's exactly what it is. It is a snare. So I'm going to go over some pieces of scripture that will shed light on this and what I'm talking about. First, let's talk about Revelation chapter 13. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but when you have a chance, read the first half of Revelation chapter 13. And I want you to pay attention to one word specifically, and that's blasphemy. It's going to say that the people in all the earth, or some people, had the whole spirit of blasphemy when it came to representing God. And all that means is that there were a bunch of people who were deceived into another type of nature as opposed to the nature of righteousness which they were originally called. Now remember in Matthew chapter 24, it says that Jesus said that at this particular point that even the elect, God's elect, have the potential of being deceived. And also remember that in Jesus' first answer, when the disciples asked him what would be the sign of thy coming, he said the first thing that you have to be careful is that you're not deceived, okay? So when you read the first half of Revelation 13, keep that in mind, all right? But also the second part of Revelation 13, which is the key thing that God was trying to show John, was the fact that it says, if anyone in verse 9 has an ear, let him hear. Verse 10, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must also be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. Faith and patience is going to be the key agents to keep you from being deceived and falling into the same character trait and behavior as the rest of the world. But also now let's hone in on the second piece of scripture, which is in the second half of Revelation 13. Revelation 13 started at verse 11. It says, then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. Verse 12 continues to say, and he exercises all authority of the first beast in the presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. Verse 13, it says, he performs great signs and wonders so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Verse 14 says, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he has granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Okay, so the first thing you need to recognize is that he was granted to speak unto this image, all right? And also that he was someone who deceived. Remember, I said that Jesus' first thing and foremost thing that he told the disciples was to make sure that you are not deceived, okay? So picture yourself in a desert without water or without any food for provision, okay? And what usually happens when you're dehydrated? You start seeing something like what's called a mirage. You start seeing images that are not really there, but you're so convinced that the object is there that you start to pursue that object when it's really not there. And that's because your dehydration has now gone into your forehead or your thoughts and has caused you to act in such a way, such as your right hand or the strength of which you act, to pursue something that is not real. That's the same thing that God is telling John, and that's the same thing that Jesus was also pointing out to the disciples.